The honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's going to be hard to follow that, but I'll do my best to make sure I say lawyer when it's appropriate, and the other word when it's appropriate, but I can't say that word in here. Mr. Speaker, we're having this debate today, and it's a great opportunity for us in this House to actually reflect and take stock as Canadians watch the debate that we're actually is happening here, because Canadians want to know that when they elect people and they send them to Ottawa, they want them to act and behave in a way that holds our entire country and the way we're perceived both domestically and around the world in the brightest light and in the highest standard possible. So that brings us to actually what the motion's all about. Now, the opposition party, or sorry, the government party and the members on the other side that are taking us to task for having this motion today are using words like frivolous. They're using comments like this is a waste of time. But if you take a look at the motion that we're actually debating today, we're debating a rather substantive document, a document that's called Open and Accountable Government, and it bears the letterhead of the Prime Minister of Canada, and it bears his signature. And, Mr. Speaker, this is the standard to which this debate should be being held. Now, the members of the Liberal Party over here, the Liberal caucus that are rising up, are hiding behind a technical ruling from the Ethics Commissioner's office. I want to be very, very clear for people watching at home how this works. Currently, we have the Conflict of Interest Act and the Code of Conduct for ministers, parliamentary secretaries, and members of Parliament. This is administered by Mary Dawson, the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. Now, she has come before the Ethics Committee many times. I chair that committee, Mr. Speaker, and I've been on that committee in previous parliaments. She has told us many times, as a matter of fact, we're reviewing the legislation. It hasn't been updated since the 80s when it was first introduced. That's how archaic the legislation actually is. And every previous government owns the responsibility of not updating that legislation. And I'm not here to debate that with the member from Lac St. Louis. I would agree with that. The time has actually come. I remain cautiously hopeful and optimistic that the new bar that will be set in law actually meets the supposed tests that the Prime Minister expects his cabinet ministers to actually make. But here's the reality. The legislation and everybody, even the witnesses that come from the Liberal Party, the witnesses that come from the NDP, witnesses that are recommended by the Library of Parliament, virtually everybody is unanimous in saying that the Conflict of Interest Code and the Conflict of Interest Act, in which creates the code, does not actually stand up in today's society. So that bar is here. Now, the Conflict of Interest Commissioner has lobbied several times, and the Information Commissioner and the Access to Information Commissioner, everybody has lobbied many times to raise the bar on all these things. The Lobbying Commissioner raising the bar. So the bar to which they say that the legislation should be changed is here. Now, the document that the Prime Minister has penned, and it's been quoted several times today, and I'll quote it again, that ministerial conduct, ministers and parliamentary secretaries must act with honesty and must uphold the highest ethical standards so that public confidence and trust in the integrity and the impartiality of government are maintained and enhanced. And it goes on to say that, moreover, ministers and parliamentary secretaries have an obligation to perform their official duties and arrange their private affairs in a manner that will bear the closest public scrutiny. This obligation is not fully discharged merely by acting within the law. The law has a standard that's down here according to almost anybody that comes before the committee. Mr. Speaker, that is not a high bar to achieve. And it's not a bar that I would hide behind if I were on the other side of the House today trying to defend. Now, this document holds a lot of hope and optimism, this open and accountable government, but we have to remember who penned this document. This document is supposedly penned by the Prime Minister. My guess it was penned by somebody else who might have worked at Queen's Park, where they currently have quotas for ministers to achieve fundraising targets, and simply signed by the Prime Minister. But nonetheless, the Prime Minister has signed the document. If he didn't pen it, he signed it, so he's responsible for it. And let's take a look at that particular individual's conduct. Since becoming an MP, we know that the current Prime Minister has accepted numerous paid speaking engagements while he was a member of Parliament. And for that, he was admonished, not necessarily technically by the Ethics Commissioner, But certainly anybody with any credibility in the media or in civil society looks at this and says, you're a member of Parliament, you've been invited to a speaking engagement, and you're charging a fee? In one particular case, Mr. Speaker, the current Prime Minister, in his capacity as a member of Parliament, actually billed the school board $780 for a limousine service to take him from Ottawa to Kingston and return him to Montreal. That was when he appeared at the Algonquin and Lakeshore Catholic School Board in Kingston, where he was paid $15,000 to be a speaker. That's 2010. He was a member of this House. And he probably had designs on being the Prime Minister at some point in time. My guess would be that you would have to do that at some particular point in time. And everybody, George Takash said MPs shouldn't get paid extra for public speaking. It's part of their job description. I certainly wouldn't even dream of accepting payment in my capacity as a member of Parliament, which I've had a privilege of doing for the last 10 years in this House. And others go on to say, I certainly wouldn't be as a member of Parliament receiving money for speaking on matters of public interest. This is something that we already get paid quite well to do, Mr. Speaker. So we have to ask ourselves, does the Prime Minister actually believe the document that he's penned, or is it do as I say, not as I do? So this raises a lot of questions. He's charged $20,000 to the Certified Management Accountants of Ontario. Now, would the Certified Management Accountants, would they have anything to lobby the government about at some particular point in time? He's also taken speaking fees from the Ontario public service unions, and we all know about Bill C4 currently on the. The ink wasn't even dry on the swearing in of the minister's paper, and there's pro-union legislation on the table in the House of Commons, Mr. Speaker. So we have to wonder just exactly where the Prime Minister is at on this. So, notwithstanding the credibility of the author of the document, I still have high hopes as chair of the Ethics Committee that we can actually elevate the legislation that we have here. But then we come to the Justice Minister and the conflict of interest that is abundantly clear to everybody in the world except the Liberal caucus. The government House leader just stood up in this House and tried to rationalize her appearance because he's able to, in his own riding, 20 minutes from his house, able to get $700 a plate fundraisers where everybody knows him. $750, he's happy. He's happy. That's enough to have access. And he asked us to equivocate that with an MP from Vancouver who has hardly been announced to anybody in the Greater Toronto area, charging $500 a plate for an invite-only, not even advertised event. Well, Mr. Speaker, that just doesn't pass muster. It doesn't make any sense at all. And when you compare that to some decisions, and I was hopeful before Christmas. I was. You know, my birthday's at Christmas, so I'm feeling good.
Like the Prime Minister.
I'm feeling really good. I share birthdays with the Prime Minister. That's about all I share with the Prime Minister. But, Mr. Speaker, prior to Christmas, the current Finance Minister was actually going to attend a fundraising event. And on the Liberal website, it encouraged people to make a $250 donation for a chance to have dinner with the Finance Minister. Well, I didn't sign up, Mr. Speaker. But at least when the story broke that that fundraiser was going to happen, the Finance Minister, who had no idea who was even going to be there, had the good sense to cancel the event. Ethical watchdogs around Canada should have jumped for joy, seized the opportunity. Little did they know that was the last opportunity they were going to get to cheer for an ethical decision by the folks across the way. Compare and contrast that now to the Justice Minister, who stepped out of her role as chair of the First Nations Financial Authority, only to have her husband and business partner step in as a lobbyist for the same group, a group that, by the way, lobbies the Minister of Justice for funding. And then we find out in the budget that $20 million has been kicked back to that organization, and apparently that passes that bar. And she went ahead and attended the $500 a plate private fundraiser anyway at Tories LLP in Toronto. She's made no bones about it. She has no interest in paying the money back. The optics of it don't appeal to anyone that I know of. It doesn't make any sense. And that leads us to today. Mr. Speaker, the question that's before the House in the motion is, will this government actually live up to the document signed by the Prime Minister and raise the ethical bar? Yes or no?